The late afternoon sun filtered through the grimy windows of Gold's gym, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. The air hung thick with the scent of sweat, old leather, and determination. In the corner of the main training area, Jackie Chan moved like liquid lightning, his body flowing from one impossible position to another. At 19, he possessed an energy that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Every leap, every roll, every strike carried with it the desperate hunger of someone who knew he had to prove himself in a world that hadn't yet recognized his worth. Jackie's training routine that day was particularly intense. He had been working on a sequence for an upcoming film, something that required him to transition seamlessly from traditional kung fu stances into acrobatic maneuvers that would make the audience gasp. His movements were precise, calculated, almost choreographed, exactly the kind of performance-oriented martial arts that looked spectacular on screen but lacked the raw, practical edge of true combat. Beads of sweat traced paths down his concentrated face as he executed a series of butterfly kicks, landing in a perfect horse stance before immediately springing into a backflip that should have been impossible from that position. The few other gym-goers had stopped their own training to watch, mesmerized by the young man's seemingly supernatural agility. That's when the atmosphere in the gym shifted. Bruce Lee entered quietly, his presence immediately commanding the space without any need for announcement. He was dressed simply: black pants, a white tank top that revealed the coiled power in his lean frame. His eyes, sharp and analytical, swept across the room before settling on Jackie's ongoing demonstration. For several minutes, Bruce simply watched, his expression unreadable, studying every movement with the intensity of a master craftsman examining another's work. Jackie continued his routine, but he could feel the legendary fighter's gaze upon him. The knowledge that Bruce Lee, the Bruce Lee, was watching both inspired and terrified him. He pushed himself harder, attempting even more complex combinations, trying to impress the man who had revolutionized martial arts cinema. After completing a particularly elaborate sequence that ended with Jackie balancing on one hand atop a heavy bag, Bruce stepped forward. The gym fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "That's not real kung fu," Bruce said, his voice carrying clearly across the space. The words hit Jackie like a physical blow. He slowly lowered himself from the heavy bag, his face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. The other gym members exchanged glances, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the air. I don't understand," Jackie managed, his English still heavily accented but his sincerity unmistakable. Bruce approached, his movements casual but purposeful. "What you're doing is beautiful," he continued, circling slowly around Jackie like a teacher examining a student's work. "It's impressive. It's exactly what the cameras love. But it's not kung fu. It's performance." Jackie's jaw tightened. He had dedicated years of his life to perfecting his art, had pushed his body beyond its limits countless times, had sacrificed everything for his craft. To hear it dismissed so casually by his hero felt like having his very identity questioned. "Real kung fu," Bruce continued, "adapts. It flows. It uses whatever is available, whatever the moment demands. It doesn't follow a script." Without warning, Bruce picked up a small towel from a nearby bench and tossed it gently toward Jackie. "Show me real kung fu. Right now. No choreography. No planning. Just react." Jackie caught the towel instinctively, but before he could process what was happening, Bruce had moved to the equipment rack and began casually tossing items in his direction. A medicine ball, a jump rope, a pair of boxing gloves. Not aggressively, but with just enough unpredictability to force Jackie into genuine reaction. The first few seconds were awkward. Jackie's muscle memory kicked in, trying to incorporate these random objects into his rehearsed movements. But Bruce kept changing the variables, kept forcing him out of his comfort zone. A water bottle sailed through the air. A workout bench was suddenly in his path. A balance ball rolled unexpectedly across his feet. And then something clicked. Jackie's movements began to change, becoming less polished but more alive. Instead of forcing the objects to fit his predetermined patterns, he began to let the objects themselves suggest the movements. The towel became a whip, then a shield. The medicine ball transformed from an obstacle into a springboard. The jump rope evolved into an extension of his reach. The transformation was subtle at first, but everyone in the gym could sense it happening. Jackie Chan was discovering something new about himself. What happened next defied everything Jackie thought he knew about martial arts. As Bruce continued his impromptu test, the random objects became partners in an increasingly elaborate dance. Jackie found himself moving in ways he had never practiced, responding to threats and opportunities that existed only in the moment. When a basketball bounced toward his feet, instead of stepping over it or kicking it away, he planted one foot on top of it and used its instability to launch into a spinning kick that cleared 3 different obstacles Bruce had positioned in his path. The other gym members had formed an unconscious circle around the 2 men, but Jackie barely noticed them anymore. His world had narrowed to this immediate challenge, this constant adaptation that Bruce was demanding of him. Every muscle in his body felt alive in a way they never had during his rehearsed routines. Bruce himself was impressed, though he kept his expression neutral. He had seen hundreds of martial artists, had worked with some of the most talented fighters in the world, but there was something unique about Jackie's response to chaos. Where most people would become frantic or fall back on rigid training patterns, Jackie was actually becoming more creative, more fluid. "Better," Bruce said, catching a barbell plate that had been rolling across the floor and setting it upright like a shield, but still thinking too much. Without warning, Bruce moved in close, not attacking, but simply occupying Jackie's space in a way that demanded immediate response. This was where Jackie's years of training in the Peking Opera School truly showed their value. His body moved before his mind could interfere, ducking and weaving around Bruce's presence while simultaneously grabbing a resistance band from the wall and using its tension to slingshot himself into a position that shouldn't have been physically possible. The move was so unexpected, so beautifully improvised, that even Bruce paused for a moment. Jackie had effectively used Bruce's own body position as part of the environment to navigate, treating the legendary fighter not as an opponent, but as another element of the landscape to flow around. "Now that," Bruce said, with the first smile Jackie had seen from him, "was real kung fu." But Jackie wasn't done. Something had awakened in him during this exchange, an understanding that went beyond technique or choreography. He began to see the entire gym differently, not as a space filled with separate pieces of equipment, but as one giant, interconnected environment where everything could potentially serve any purpose. He leaped onto the pull-up bar, but instead of using it for its intended purpose, he swung around it like a gymnast, using the momentum to launch himself toward a stack of mats. Rather than landing on them normally, he hit them at an angle that sent him bouncing off toward a heavy bag, which he used as a springboard to ricochet back across the space. The sequence was happening so fast that the watching crowd could barely follow it, but each movement flowed naturally into the next. Jackie was quite literally bouncing off the walls, using every surface, every object, every angle as part of one continuous fluid motion that seemed to mock the very concept of gravity. Bruce found himself having to work to keep up, not because Jackie was moving faster than he could handle, but because the young man's movements had become genuinely unpredictable. There was no pattern to analyze, no strategy to counter, just pure, moment-to-moment adaptation. The climax came when Jackie, in the middle of what appeared to be a completely chaotic sequence of bounces and ricochets, suddenly found himself airborne above a pommel horse with nowhere to land safely. For a split second, even he wasn't sure how to resolve the situation. That's when Bruce stepped in, not to help, but to add one final variable to the equation. He rolled an exercise ball directly into Jackie's path, creating what should have been an impossible obstacle. Instead, Jackie's hands found the ball's surface, used it to redirect his momentum, and turned what should have been a crash into a controlled landing that left him standing perfectly balanced on top of a narrow gymnastics beam that no one had even noticed was there. The gym erupted in spontaneous applause, but Jackie barely heard it. He was staring at Bruce, who was looking back at him with something that might have been pride. "That," Bruce said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is what happens when you stop performing kung fu and start living it." The lesson was immediate and profound. Jackie realized that everything he had been doing before, all his precise, beautiful, camera-ready techniques, had been like speaking a foreign language fluently, but without understanding what the words actually meant. This improvised session with Bruce had forced him to discover the soul behind the movements, the principle that made kung fu more than just elaborate fighting. As the crowd began to disperse and normal gym activity resumed, Bruce approached Jackie with a respect that hadn't been there at the beginning of their encounter. "You have something special," he said quietly. "Don't let Hollywood take it away from you." The weeks that followed that afternoon at Gold's Gym changed everything for Jackie Chan. He couldn't stop thinking about Bruce's words, about the difference between performing kung fu and living it. Every training session became an experiment in adaptation. Every stunt rehearsal a chance to discover new possibilities within the moment, rather than simply executing predetermined movements. Word of the encounter spread through Hong Kong's tight-knit film community with the speed that only truly remarkable stories achieve. Directors who had previously seen Jackie as simply another athletic performer began to understand that they had access to something genuinely unique. A fighter who could turn any environment into his ally, who could find solutions to physical problems that existed only in the space between one heartbeat and the next. But the real impact of that day wasn't professional. It was personal. Jackie had discovered something about himself that went far deeper than career advancement. He had learned that his greatest strength wasn't his ability to perform spectacular techniques, but his capacity to remain present and creative under pressure. The lesson Bruce had taught him wasn't really about martial arts at all. It was about approaching life itself with the same fluid adaptability he had shown in those chaotic minutes among the gym equipment. The transformation became evident in Jackie's subsequent films. Where his earlier work had showcased impressive but somewhat predictable action sequences, his post-Bruce Lee performances began to display a spontaneity and inventiveness that left audiences genuinely surprised. He started incorporating everyday objects into his fight scenes, not as gimmicks, but as natural extensions of the environment, exactly as he had learned to do that afternoon. More importantly, Jackie began to understand that his unique contribution to martial arts cinema wouldn't come from trying to replicate Bruce Lee's intensity or philosophical depth, but from embracing his own natural instinct for improvisation and environmental adaptation. He developed a style that was unmistakably his own, one that combined the precision of his opera school training with the moment-to-moment creativity that Bruce had awakened in him. Years later, when Jackie had become an international superstar, known for his innovative action sequences and death-defying stunts, he would often return to that moment at Gold's Gym in interviews and conversations. He would describe it as the day he learned the difference between knowing Kung Fu and understanding it, between following a script and writing one with his body in real time. The encounter also taught Jackie something crucial about mentorship and legacy. Bruce hadn't taught him new techniques or shared secret knowledge. Instead, he had created conditions that forced Jackie to discover capabilities he already possessed, but hadn't learned to trust. This approach would later influence how Jackie worked with younger performers and stunt teams, always pushing them to find their own creative solutions rather than simply copying his methods. The philosophical implications of that afternoon continued to resonate throughout Jackie's career. He began to see every film set, every stunt sequence, every apparently impossible physical challenge as a variation of that moment, when Bruce had started tossing random objects in his direction. Life itself, he realized, was constantly throwing unexpected variables into even the most carefully planned situations. And success came not from trying to control those variables, but from learning to dance with them. This mindset became evident not just in Jackie's professional work, but in his approach to life's challenges. When injuries threatened to end his career, when cultural barriers made his transition to Hollywood seem impossible, when critics dismissed his style as too comedic or too dangerous, Jackie responded with the same fluid adaptability he had discovered that day at the gym. Instead of fighting against obstacles, he learned to use them as launching points for unexpected solutions. The lesson proved especially valuable when Jackie began working on international productions where cultural differences and language barriers could have been insurmountable problems. Instead, he approached these challenges with the same creative improvisation, finding ways to communicate through physical comedy and universal human emotions that transcended any specific cultural context. Perhaps most significantly, the encounter taught Jackie about the relationship between preparation and spontaneity. Bruce hadn't been suggesting that training and discipline were unnecessary. Rather, he had shown Jackie that the purpose of rigorous preparation was to create a foundation strong enough to support genuine spontaneity. All those years of grueling practice at the opera school hadn't been wasted. They had given Jackie the physical vocabulary he needed to speak fluently in the language of moment-to-moment adaptation. As Jackie's career evolved and he became known worldwide for action sequences that seemed to rewrite the rules of what was physically possible, he never forgot the core lesson from that afternoon. Real mastery isn't about perfecting a set of predetermined responses, but about developing the confidence and creativity to find new responses that no one, including yourself, has ever seen before. The encounter at Gold's Gym had lasted perhaps 20 minutes, but its influence rippled through decades of Jackie's work and life. It reminded him that the most profound teachings often come not through lectures or demonstrations, but through experiences that force us to discover our own hidden capabilities. In the end, Bruce Lee hadn't just corrected Jackie's technique that day, he had helped him discover his own unique path forward, one that would eventually make Jackie Chan a name recognized around the world as synonymous with creative, death-defying, physics-bending action that transforms everyday environments into playgrounds of possibility.